The ArcVR avatar package allows you to apply a rigged humanoid model to the pose of a VR rig. The humanoid will assume the player's pose based on the locations of controllers and head-mounted display. Adding an avatar module is easy. Simply select the player rig object, click Add Module, select the avatar module and click on Update. A default avatar module will be added as a child object to the player rig. The avatar module consists of a pose provider and, as a child object, a pose assumer. The pose provider estimates the pose of the player based on the locations of the left and right controllers as well as the head-mounted display. You can set a body inertia value which will reduce shaking and micro-stuttering produced by tracking inaccuracies or small movements of the head-mounted display. You also have a plethora of calibration options which will allow you to adapt the pose provider to different 3D models or subjects. You can view pose information by simply hitting play. The white lines indicate the neck and torso, the green line indicates the view vector and the head, the yellow line indicates the position of the hands, and the red line indicates the position of the feet. The pose assumer object applies a pose onto a 3D model. The provider from which the pose information is extracted to apply on a model is set in this provider property. The assumer also requires the neck and head transform of your 3D model to apply the pose correctly. You can set individual weights of individual inverse kinematics targets under the Weights tab. By default, the pose assumer comes parented to the pose provider. This makes sense if you want the 3D model to be at the exact same location as the player themselves. However, it does function fully independently. If you unpack the pose provider, then you can deparent the pose assumer and move him to a different location. The avatar will then mimic the player's pose at that specific location. You can also put down multiple pose assumers linked to one single provider, or even resize and scale them. To create a new avatar from a rigged 3D model, you will have to configure the model with Unity's avatar system. You can do this automatically by importing the model with animation type set as humanoid and avatar definition set as create from this model. You can also click on the configure button to set the individual bones and locations by hand. Once you are confident the avatar is configured correctly, simply hit Done. Once your 3D model imports with a correctly configured avatar, you can set the avatar in the avatar field of the animator on your pose assumer. The animation controller of your animator that is attached to your pose assumer will need at least one layer where inverse kinematic pass is set to true. This layer will correspond to the pose provided by the pose provider. Setting the weight of this layer will correspondingly affect the weight of the pose provided by the pose provider. If you enable the Auto Layer Blend function on your pose assumer, The pose assumer will automatically set the weight of the inverse kinematics layer based on the speed that the player rig is moving at. It will use the given speed animation parameter and layer blend speed to blend between the pose provided by the pose provider and a default running animation. You can set the speed parameter up in your animation controller so that a walking animation is played while the player rig is teleporting from one location to another. Note that you can only do this if teleportation mode is set to dash or fade dash. The simple avatar module is intended for when you don't want to use controllers. You can add it by pressing Add Module, selecting Simple Avatar Module and clicking Update. The Simple Avatar module consists of a single component that follows the head-mounted display and faces in the direction that it's moving. It sets a speed animation parameter with which you can play a walking animation while the player is moving. In the pose provider, you can set two pose naturalization filters for each controller or hand. These will normalize the pose so that it doesn't look too bizarre when the subject places the controllers onto the ground or to the side or similar. These filters essentially consist of point clouds of normal or regular controller locations relative to the head-mounted display, and the actual location of the controller will then be moved in the direction of the point cloud during runtime via a weighted average. It works similarly to a KNN algorithm, so keep in mind that performance can be affected, and you can create your own filters or edit the default one by using the scriptable object interface.